Emily noticed something different about her mother, something she hadn't seen in 2 long years, 730 days to be exact. It wasn't her body. Her mother's body was the same, still in the wheelchair. Right arm paralyzed, right leg without movement. It was her eyes. Her mother's eyes were alive. This is the story of how a housekeeper who had lost everything taught a ballerina who could no longer move. That being alive doesn't require dancing with your body, only with your soul. If you've ever watched someone you love fade into a shadow of who they once were, then stay with me, because this story will break your heart. And then it will teach you that impossible is just a word we use for things we're afraid to try. Mrs. Eleanor Vance had been a professional ballerina for 30 years. Classical ballet, the Kennedy Center, Lincoln Center, the Vail Dance Festival. For 3 decades, her body had been her language, each movement a word, each posture a phrase, each choreography a poem. And then, one Tuesday in April, 2 years ago, it all ended. Massive stroke, cerebral vascular accident, a stroke, whatever you call it. The result was the same. Complete right hemiplegia, right arm paralyzed from the shoulder, right leg without movement from the hip. Half of her body simply stopped responding. The doctors gave her 6 months of intensive therapy. They said there was a window, a possibility of partial recovery, but that window was small and closing fast. Eleanor did the therapy for 3 months. Physical therapy, occupational therapy, movement exercises, specialized equipment, the best therapists in New York City. There was no improvement, not even an inch. By the 4th month, Eleanor stopped trying, not because her body wouldn't respond, but because something worse had happened, something no doctor had warned about, something no therapy could cure. Eleanor had lost the will to be alive. What is a ballerina who can no longer dance? A painter who can no longer hold a brush? A pianist without fingers? A bird without wings? Eleanor stopped talking, stopped eating unless someone insisted, stopped looking out the window. She spent entire days sitting in her wheelchair, staring into space, as if waiting for life to forget about her. And Emily, her daughter, didn't know what to do. Emily Vance, 45 years old, CEO of a chain of 12 boutique hotels across the United States. A woman who built empires, who solved impossible problems, who turned bankruptcies into fortunes, but she couldn't solve this. She couldn't give her mother back her legs. She couldn't give her back her arms. She couldn't give her back her dance. And every time she visited her mother, which was happening less and less frequently, she felt a guilt that crushed her, because Emily knew the truth. She wasn't visiting less because she was busy. She was visiting less because she couldn't bear to see her mother like this, to see the woman who had soared across stages, reduced to a wheelchair, to see the eyes that once sparkled, now empty. It was easier to pay for the best care and not be present. Easier to send checks than to send time. Easier to hire caregivers than to be the caregiver. Eleanor lived in a house in Greenwich Village, the house where she had raised Emily, a 3-bedroom house with a small garden and walls covered in photos of Eleanor on stage. Eleanor in arabesque, Eleanor in grand jeté, Eleanor receiving applause, photos of a life that no longer existed. Emily had hired 3 caregivers in 2 years. They all quit. Not because Eleanor was difficult, but because it was impossible to care for someone who didn't want to be cared for. Impossible to feed someone who didn't want to eat. Impossible to bathe someone who didn't see the point in being clean. The 3rd caregiver quit in February, and Emily, desperate, hired Sarah Jenkins. Sarah was 42 years old, serene face, strong hands. She spoke little, worked hard. In the interview, Emily explained the situation. My mother is in a wheelchair, right hemiplegia. She can't walk. She needs help with everything. And she's depressed, very depressed. She doesn't talk much, doesn't eat much, doesn't live much. Sarah nodded. I understand. Do you have experience with patients like this? I have experience with people who believe they no longer have a reason to move. Yes. Emily frowned. And what do you do with people like that? Sarah looked her directly in the eyes. I remind them that movement isn't just physical. Sometimes the body can't move, but the soul still can. Emily didn't understand what that meant, but something in Sarah's eyes told her that this woman was different. She hired her. Sarah started working on March 1st. Her hours were 7 in the morning to 3 in the afternoon, 6 days a week. Salary of $3,000 a month. Her responsibilities were simple: prepare Eleanor's breakfast, help her bathe, dress her, give her her medications, prepare her lunch, keep the house clean. Basic tasks, nothing extraordinary. For the first 2 weeks, Sarah did exactly that. She arrived at 7 o'clock sharp, prepared breakfast, helped Eleanor, cleaned the house, left at 3. Eleanor remained the same, silent, empty, absent. But Sarah wasn't discouraged. Every morning while helping Eleanor bathe, she talked to her. Good morning, Eleanor. It's sunny today. The garden looks lovely. Would you like us to open the window after breakfast? Eleanor didn't respond, but Sarah continued. I see you have photos on the walls. You were a ballerina, weren't you? How beautiful. Ballet is like poetry in motion. Silence. But Sarah didn't give up. And then, in the 3rd week, something changed. Emily came to visit her mother on a Sunday morning. She arrived early at 8 because she had a meeting at 10 and wanted to at least spend an hour with Eleanor. When she entered the house, she heard something she hadn't heard in 2 years. Laughter, not loud laughter, just a soft laugh, almost inaudible, but definitely laughter. Emily walked quickly toward the living room, and what she saw left her frozen. Eleanor was sitting in her wheelchair in front of the window. Sarah was kneeling beside her, holding a photo album. She was showing photos to Eleanor, describing them to her, because Eleanor couldn't hold the album with her paralyzed arm. Look at this one, Eleanor, you in the tutu. How elegant. And here, this one with the flowers. Someone gave you roses after the performance, didn't they? And Eleanor, for the first time in months, was smiling. A small smile, trembling, but real. Emily felt something break in her chest. Her mother had smiled. Emily looked up and saw Sarah standing in the doorway. Good morning, Miss Emily. Your mother and I were just reminiscing. Emily couldn't speak. She just nodded. Mrs. Vance turned her head slightly. She looked at Emily, and in her eyes, for the first time in 2 years, there was something different. Not joy, not yet, but also not the absolute emptiness from before. There was presence. Emily stayed for an hour. She watched Sarah interact with Mrs. Vance. The way she spoke to her, not as if she were talking to an invalid, but as if she were talking to a person, with respect, with genuine interest. When Emily left that day, she felt something she hadn't felt in months. Hope, small, fragile, but there. Over the next few weeks, Emily began to notice more changes. Mrs. Vance was eating better. Sarah would ask her what she wanted to eat, offered options, included her in the decisions. Mrs. Vance was more alert. When Emily visited, Mrs. Vance looked directly at her, not just looking in her direction, looking at her. And Mrs. Vance was sitting up straighter, not physically stronger, but her posture in the wheelchair had changed before she slumped. Now she sat more upright. Emily asked Sarah what she was doing differently. Nothing special, Miss Emily. I just talk to her. I ask her things. I include her. Sometimes people just need someone to remind them that they still matter. But Emily knew there was something more, something she couldn't quite put her finger on. Then, one Thursday in May, Emily had a meeting cancelled at the last minute. It was 8 in the morning. She didn't usually visit her mother during the week, but the office was near Greenwich Village. She decided to stop by for a quick visit. When she arrived at the house, the door was unlocked. Emily entered quietly, and she heard something strange. Deep breaths. They were coming from Mrs. Vance's room. Emily walked down the hallway. The door was ajar. She peeked inside, and what she saw took her breath away. Mrs. Vance was in her wheelchair, but she wasn't slumped over. She was sitting very straight. Her eyes were closed, and she was breathing deeply, inhaling through her nose, exhaling through her mouth. And behind her, standing, was Sarah, with her hands gently resting on Mrs. Vance's shoulders. Inhale, Eleanor, deeply. Feel the air filling your lungs. Exhale, slowly. Feel the tension leaving your body. Mrs. Vance obeyed, breathing with a rhythm that Emily hadn't seen in 2 years. Calm, centered, present. Emily stood frozen, watching. Sarah moved her hands from Mrs. Vance's shoulders to her left arm, the one that still functioned. Now we're going to move your arm, slowly. With intention, lift your left arm. Like that. Very good. Now stretch it towards the sky. Feel the stretch. Feel your body remembering that it can still move. Mrs. Vance lifted her left arm slowly, stretched it upwards, her fingers reaching for something invisible. And on her face, there was something that Emily hadn't seen since the stroke. Peace. Sarah guided Mrs. Vance's arm back down. Then she moved to the right side of the wheelchair, the paralyzed side. Now your right arm. I'm going to help you. You don't have to force it. Just feel the movement. Remember that your body is still here. It just needs someone to help it move. Sarah gently lifted Mrs. Vance's paralyzed arm, moved it in small circles, gently, as if she were choreographing a dance. Mrs. Vance had tears streaming down her face, but they weren't tears of pain. They were tears of something else, something Emily couldn't name. Sarah continued moving Mrs. Vance's arm with infinite tenderness, as if she were holding something sacred. Then she lowered the arm and knelt in front of Mrs. Vance. Now we're going to do the same with your legs. Your left leg first. Lift it a little, just a little. I'm holding you. You won't fall. I've got you. Mrs. Vance, with visible effort, lifted her left leg a few inches off the footrest of the wheelchair. Perfect. Very good. Now your right leg. I'll move it for you. Just feel. Remember that dancing doesn't always require you to move your legs. Sometimes someone else can move them for you, and it's still movement. It's still dance. Sarah carefully lifted Mrs. Vance's paralyzed leg, flexed it gently, stretched it, as if she were helping her do an invisible battement tendu, and Mrs. Vance, with her eyes still closed, whispered something so softly that Emily almost didn't hear it. I feel alive. Again. Emily felt tears streaming down her own face. She didn't enter the room. She didn't interrupt. She just stood there, in the hallway, watching a housekeeper do something that all the doctors, all the therapists, all the specialists hadn't been able to do. Return to her mother the feeling of being alive. When the session ended, Sarah helped Mrs. Vance settle back into her wheelchair. She put a blanket over her legs, gave her a glass of water. How do you feel, Eleanor? Mrs. Vance opened her eyes, and in them there was something that hadn't existed in 730 days. Hope. Good. I feel good, Sarah smiled. We'll do more tomorrow. A little bit each day. The body remembers. It just needs us to remind it that it still can. Emily waited until Sarah left the room. Then she intercepted Sarah in the hallway. Sarah stopped, surprised. Miss Emily, I didn't know you were here. What were you doing? Sarah hesitated. I was helping Mrs. Vance move. That was yoga, wasn't it? Sarah nodded slowly. Adapted yoga. Yes. Why? Sarah looked towards Mrs. Vance's room, then back at Emily. Because your mother doesn't need doctors. She's already had the best ones. What she needs is to remember that being in a wheelchair doesn't mean being dead, that her body still exists, that she can still move, even if someone else has to move her. And that movement is life. Always. How long have you been doing this? Sarah lowered her gaze. 6 weeks. Emily felt something tighten in her throat. 6 weeks. 42 days, 42 days. While Emily was building hotels and closing deals, this woman had been giving her mother something that money couldn't buy. And she's improved. Sarah looked up. Physically, little. The right arm still doesn't move on its own. Neither does the right leg. But emotionally, look at her eyes, Miss Emily. Do you see the difference? Emily swallowed. Yes, I see the difference. That's the miracle. Not that the body heals, but that the soul wants to live again. Emily didn't know what to say. She stood there in the hallway, watching a housekeeper teach her something that all her years in business never had. That there are things money just can't buy, and that sometimes the wisest people don't have fancy degrees. They just have hearts that see what others can't. If this story's getting to you, good, because what's coming is even more powerful. Because Emily is about to discover exactly how much Sarah has sacrificed to bring her mother back to life. And she's going to understand that the real miracles don't come in the form of cures. They come in the form of people who refuse to give up. After that day, Emily started arriving at her mother's house early, not every day, but once or twice a week, always at 8 in the morning, always in silence, and she'd always stay in the hallway, just watching. She saw Sarah guiding Eleanor through deep breaths. Pranayama, Sarah called it when Emily asked later. Breath control, the foundation of yoga. She saw Sarah moving Eleanor's paralyzed arm in slow circles, talking to her the whole time. Feel the movement, Eleanor. Your arm is still connected to your brain. It's just that the pathway is blocked, but we can remind your body that it still exists. She saw Sarah gently flexing Eleanor's paralyzed leg, stretching it, bending it, as if she were helping her do an invisible ballet bar. And she saw something else, something that broke her in a way she didn't expect. She saw her mother's face transform during those sessions, her eyes closed, tears streaming down, but not tears of pain, tears of release. As if for 45 minutes every morning, Eleanor stopped being a paralyzed woman in a wheelchair and became a ballerina again. A ballerina who couldn't move on her own, but who moved anyway. One day, Emily dared to enter the room during a session. Sarah saw her, but didn't stop. She just nodded. Eleanor had her eyes closed. She didn't know Emily was there. Sarah was moving Eleanor's right arm into a position that Emily recognized. Arabesque, one of the most iconic movements in ballet. The arm extended forward, elegant, like a swan. Your body remembers this, Eleanor. Your muscles, your bones, your tendons, they all remember. 30 years of ballet don't just disappear because the brain stops sending signals. The memory is there. We just need to awaken it. And then Emily saw something that left her speechless. The fingers on Eleanor's paralyzed arm moved. Not much, maybe 2 millimeters. An almost imperceptible tremor, but they moved. Sarah saw it too. Her eyes widened, but she didn't scream. She didn't make a fuss. She just smiled gently. Did you feel that, Eleanor? Eleanor opened her eyes. She looked down at her right arm. She saw Sarah holding her arm in the arabesque position. Feel what? Your fingers moved, on their own. Eleanor looked at her fingers. She tried to move them again. Nothing happened, but Sarah wasn't discouraged. That's okay. They moved today. That means the connection is still there. Maybe weak, maybe broken, but it exists. And if they moved once, they can move again. Eleanor started to cry. Not tears of joy, tears of something more complex. Grief, hope, fear, all mixed together. I'm never going to dance again. Sarah knelt in front of her. She took Eleanor's left hand, the one that worked. Maybe not in the way you danced before, but that doesn't mean you can't dance. Dance isn't just standing on a stage. Dance is movement with intention, movement with soul. And you have that. I feel it every morning when we do this. Emily had to leave the room. She didn't want her mother to see her crying, But before she left, she heard something else. "Sarah, why do you do this? No one is paying you for this." There was a long silence. Then Sarah spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "My mother had a stroke too, 5 years ago. Hemiplegia, just like you. I put her in a wheelchair. I hired the best caregivers. I paid for the best therapies, but she gave up. She just let herself die. And I never did enough to remind her that she was still worth being alive. She died 8 months after the stroke. Not because her body couldn't live, but because her soul had decided it didn't want to anymore. And that's something that haunts me every day. So, when I see someone in a wheelchair with that same empty look, I have to try. I have to remind them that it's worth it to move, even if someone else has to move them." Emily left the house and sat in her car on the street for 20 minutes, just crying, because she understood something she had never understood before. Sarah wasn't helping Eleanor for money. She was helping Eleanor to save her own mother, retroactively, through another woman, through time. It was her way of redeeming herself. And Emily, who had been paying for the best care but had never been present, understood that that was exactly what she had been doing too, avoiding, paying so she wouldn't have to feel. That night, Emily did something she had never done before. She researched adaptive yoga. She read medical articles, case studies, movement therapies for patients with hemiplegia, and she discovered something fascinating: passive movement. When someone else moves the paralyzed limbs of a patient, can help maintain the range of motion. It can prevent muscle stiffness, and in rare, very rare cases, it can stimulate dormant neural connections. It doesn't cure paralysis, but it improves the quality of life. And emotionally, reminding a patient that their body still exists, that they can still move, even if it's with help, can be the difference between giving up and continuing to fight. Emily found a study from a university in California. Patients with hemiplegia who received adaptive yoga for 6 months showed a significant improvement in mood, reduction in depression, increased willingness to participate in conventional therapies. They didn't regain full mobility, but they regained hope. And hope, according to the study, was sometimes more important than mobility itself. Emily closed her laptop and made a decision. The next day, she arrived at her mother's house at 7 in the morning, before Sarah arrived. Eleanor was awake, sitting in her bed. Emily helped her transfer to the wheelchair, something she had never done before. She had always left that to the caregivers. But now, as she held her mother, feeling the weight of her body, feeling how Mrs. Vance trusted her not to fall, Emily understood something. Taking care of someone isn't a chore, it's a connection. When Sarah arrived at 7, Emily was waiting for her in the living room. Sarah stopped, surprised. "Miss Emily, is everything all right?" "Yes, I want to talk to you. Please, sit down." Sarah sat, nervously. "I want you to teach me." "Teach you? What?" "What you do with my mother. The adaptive yoga. I want to learn. I want to be able to do it myself." Sarah blinked, confused. "Why?" "Because I've realized something. I've been paying other people to take care of my mother because it was easier than doing it myself. But that's not care, it's avoidance, and I want to change that. I want to be present. I want to be part of her recovery, even if it's not physical recovery, even if it's only emotional recovery. I want to be there." Sarah smiled, a small but genuine smile. "Your mother is going to be so happy." And so began something extraordinary. Over the next few weeks, Sarah taught Emily how to support the paralyzed arm, how to move it gently, how to guide the breathing, how to talk to Mrs. Vance during the sessions. Emily started arriving at 7 in the morning, 3 times a week. She participated in the sessions with Sarah, learning, practicing, and Mrs. Vance, seeing her daughter there, present, participating, began to change even more. She started to talk more, to ask questions, to tell stories of her days as a performer at the Kennedy Center. One day, while Sarah was moving her right arm and Emily was moving her right leg, Mrs. Vance said something that neither of them expected. "Thank you to both of you for reminding me that being alive isn't the same as having a pulse. It's wanting to have a pulse. And you both gave me that back." Emily had to stop. She left the room for a moment. She cried in the hallway. When she returned, Mrs. Vance was looking at her. "Are you all right, dear?" Emily nodded, wiping away her tears. "I'm fine, Mom. I just missed you so much, and I didn't realize how much until now." Mrs. Vance raised her left hand. She extended it towards Emily. Emily took it, and mother and daughter stayed like that, in silence, hand in hand, for the first time in 2 years. Sarah left the room discreetly, giving them their moment, but before she left, she saw something on the table next to Mrs. Vance's bed that she hadn't seen before. A yoga mat, folded carefully, and a note taped on top, written in Mrs. Vance's shaky handwriting, with her left hand. "For Sarah, thank you for teaching me to fly again." Sarah smiled. She put the note in her pocket and knew she had done the right thing. Over the next 2 months, the routine continued. Sarah arrived at 7, Emily arrived 3 times a week, together. They guided Mrs. Vance through 45 minutes of adaptive yoga, and Mrs. Vance kept improving, not physically. Her right arm was still mostly paralyzed. Her right leg didn't respond either. But emotionally, she was a different person. She talked, laughed, told jokes, asked them to play ballet music during the sessions. Sometimes she closed her eyes and moved her left arm in dance positions while Sarah moved her right arm. Emily began to notice something else. Her mother was stronger, not muscularly, but in presence, in willpower. One day, during a session, Sarah was moving Mrs. Vance's right arm in circles when Mrs. Vance said, "Wait." Sarah stopped. "I want to try something." Mrs. Vance closed her eyes, breathed deeply, and focused all her attention on her right hand. The fingers moved, this time not 2 millimeters, but half a centimeter, visible, unmistakable. Emily and Sarah looked at each other. Mrs. Vance opened her eyes, looked at her hand. It moved. "I felt it." Sarah knelt in front of her. "Yes, it moved. Can you try again?" Mrs. Vance tried. This time the fingers didn't move, but that didn't matter, because it had happened once again. The connection, however weak, still existed. Mrs. Vance's neurologist, Dr. Ramirez, came to visit her 2 weeks later for her quarterly checkup. He checked her vital signs, her range of motion, her mental state, and when he finished, he looked at Emily with an expression of surprise. "What are you doing differently?" "What do you mean?" "Your mother is significantly better than at the last visit." "Not physically. The neurological damage is still the same, but mentally, emotionally, she's a different person. Her muscle tone has improved, her posture has improved, and she tells me her fingers have moved a couple of times." Emily looked at Sarah, who was standing in the corner of the room. "My housekeeper is teaching her adaptive yoga every day for almost 3 months." The doctor looked at Sarah, then back at Emily. "Adaptive yoga? Interesting. And do you notice a difference?" Emily looked at her mother. "I see the difference in her eyes." "Doctor, they're alive again." The doctor nodded slowly. "Sometimes medicine focuses so much on curing the body that it forgets that the body and mind are connected. If the mind doesn't want to live, the body won't fight either. But if the mind finds a reason to live, the body responds, not always with complete healing, but with willpower. And that, Miss Vance, is what your housekeeper gave back to your mother. Willpower." Emily felt something break in her chest, but not of pain, of gratitude. When the doctor left, Emily called Sarah to the living room. "Sarah, your salary is $3,000 a month." "Yes, Miss Emily. Starting tomorrow, it will be $9,000. And your title will not be housekeeper. It will be movement therapist, official. I'm going to hire someone else for the cleaning duties. You're going to focus completely on my mother." Sarah was speechless. "Miss, I don't need—" "Yes, you do. And my mother needs you. And I need you to keep doing what you're doing. Because what you're doing is a miracle. Maybe not the kind of miracle that doctors recognize, but it's a miracle all the same." Sarah began to cry. "Thank you. Thank you for seeing your mother. Really seeing her." Emily smiled. "Thank you for teaching me to see her. If you think you already know how this story ends, wait, because what comes next is the moment that will break you. Because Emily is going to discover something about Sarah that will change everything, and she will understand that the true heroes aren't the ones who have titles. They are the ones who have hearts that refuse to let hope die." 4 months after Sarah started working, something extraordinary happened. It was a Thursday morning. Emily had arrived early as usual, 6:30 a.m. She wanted to be there when Sarah arrived at 7, but when she got to her mother's house, she saw something strange. Sarah was already there. Her bag was in the living room, her sweater hung on the coat rack. Emily frowned. It was 6:35. Sarah always arrived at 7 o'clock sharp. She walked towards Mrs. Vance's room. The door was closed, but Emily heard voices inside. Sarah's voice, Mrs. Vance's voice, and another voice, a voice she didn't recognize. Emily knocked softly on the door. "Come in," Mrs. Vance said. Emily opened the door, and what she saw left her completely confused. Sarah was standing next to Mrs. Vance's wheelchair, and on the floor, on a yoga mat, was another person, a woman, maybe 60 years old, also in a wheelchair, but now lying on the mat. Sarah was gently moving her legs, guiding her through stretches. Emily stood frozen in the doorway. Mrs. Vance smiled when she saw her. "Darling, come in. I'd like you to meet Beatrice. She's my yoga buddy." "Yoga buddy?" Emily asked, puzzled. Sarah stood up quickly. "Miss Emily, I'm so sorry. I should have told you. Beatrice she's my neighbor. She also had a stroke. She's also in a wheelchair. And when I told her about Mrs. Vance, she asked if I could help her too. I said yes, but I knew I'd have to come early, before my official hours. I didn't want to use your mother's time, so I arrive at 6 to work with Beatrice. Then at 7, I start with Mrs. Vance." Emily looked at Beatrice, then at Sarah, then at her mother. "How long have you been doing this?" Sarah lowered her eyes. 6 weeks. Emily felt a tightness in her chest. "You're arriving at 6 in the morning? Every day?" "Yes, Miss Emily. And I'm only paying you from 7? "Yes, Miss Emily." "So you're working an hour for free, every day, for 6 weeks?" Sarah didn't say anything. Emily sat down on Mrs. Vance's bed. "Why?" she asked. "Because Beatrice doesn't have the money to pay for a therapist. And her daughter works 12 hours a day to support them. And Beatrice has the same look that Mrs. Vance had when I first started. That look that life is over. And I can't see that look and do nothing." Emily covered her face with her hands. "How many more people are coming here in secret?" Sarah hesitated. 3. Beatrice at 6, Robert at 5:30, and Amparo on Saturdays at 6 a.m. before you come to visit. Emily looked up slowly. "You're arriving at 5:30 in the morning?" "Only some days." "Sarah, you live in Queens, right?" "Yes, Miss Emily." "That's an hour and a half away from here. What time do you wake up to get here by 5:30? 3:30. "And what time do you go to bed?" "Around 11, after dinner and preparing everything for the next day." Emily did the math in her head. "You're sleeping 4.5 hours a night." Sarah shrugged. "I'm used to it, and it's worth it. Look at these people. Look at their eyes. They're alive again." Emily looked at Beatrice. The woman was looking at her with an expression of hope. "Please don't fire her," Beatrice said, her voice trembling. "Sarah is the only reason I still want to wake up in the mornings." Emily felt tears streaming down her face. "I'm not going to fire her, but this is going to end." Beatrice paled. Emily continued, "Because Sarah isn't going to keep working for free, and she's not going to keep sleeping 4 hours a night. Sarah, starting tomorrow, your official hours are from 6 a.m. to 2 p.m., and your salary won't be $36,000. It will be $50,000, because you're clearly doing the work of 2 therapists, and Beatrice, Robert, and Amparo are going to be official patients. I'm going to cover their sessions, free for them, but paid for Sarah." Sarah was speechless. "Ms. Emily, I can't accept." "Yes, you can. And you will accept it, because what you're doing isn't just helping my mother, it's changing lives, and that's worth far more than $50,000 a month, but it's the least I can do." Mrs. Vance began to applaud with her left hand, hitting it against her leg. Beatrice also applauded, and Sarah, for the first time since Emily had met her, broke down. She wept, not little tears, deep sobs that shook her whole body. Emily stood up. She hugged Sarah, and as she held her, she understood something profound. This woman wasn't just a home health aide who did yoga. She was someone who had found her purpose, and that purpose was to give hope back to people the world had forgotten. That night, Emily couldn't sleep. She stayed awake, thinking about Sarah, about 3:30 in the morning, about the 4.5 hours of sleep, about the 3 people who arrived in secret, and she made a decision. The next day, Emily did something that no one expected. She called a meeting with the directors of her 12 boutique hotels. She presented them with a proposal. "I want to create a program. It's going to be called Impossible Movement. It will offer free adapted yoga to any employee or family member of an employee who has a physical disability. Paralysis, stroke, multiple sclerosis, whatever it is." One of the directors raised his hand. "And who's going to pay for that?" "I am, personally. I'm going to invest $500,000 to start. We're going to hire trained therapists. We're going to adapt spaces in each hotel. And we're going to offer free sessions, because I've learned something recently. When a person loses the ability to move, they don't just lose mobility, they lose hope. And if we can give them back that hope, even a little bit, it's worth every dollar." The silence in the room was absolute. Then one of the directors, a man named Antonio, who had worked with Emily for 15 years, spoke. "My son has cerebral palsy. He's 11 years old. He's been in a wheelchair for 7 years, and I think this program could change his life." Emily felt something break in her chest. "Then your son will be our first patient." Antonio began to cry, and Emily understood something that she had never understood in all her years in business. You don't build an empire just with money. You build it with humanity. 6 months later, the Impossible Movement program was operating in all 12 of Emily's hotels. Sarah trained other therapists. She taught them what she knew: how to move paralyzed bodies with gentleness, how to talk to patients who have lost hope, how to see the person behind the wheelchair. 50 people participated in the first month, 120 in the third month, 200 in the 6th month. And each of them, according to the therapist's reports, showed emotional improvement. Not always physical, but emotional. They were smiling again. They were talking again. They were hopeful again. Mrs. Eleanor Vance became an ambassador for the program. In her wheelchair, she would visit hotels with Emily. She spoke with other patients. She told them her story. "A year ago, I didn't want to live. Now, I never want to stop living. And the difference is one woman who refused to see me as an invalid. She saw me as a dancer who just needed help to move. And on one of those visits, something extraordinary happened. Mrs. Vance was speaking with a group of 10 wheelchair-bound patients. Emily and Sarah were standing behind her. Mrs. Vance was explaining how the adapted yoga had helped her, how she had regained hope, how her body still remembered how to dance. And then without planning it. Mrs. Vance raised her left arm. She extended it to the side and began to move it slowly in a ballet position. First position, second position, third. And as she moved her arm, her right arm, the paralyzed one, began to tremble. Sarah saw it. Emily saw it. Everyone in the room saw it. Mrs. Vance's right arm, which had been immobile for 2 years, began to rise only 4 inches, trembling, slow, with visible effort. But it rose. For the first time in 2 years, Mrs. Vance moved her paralyzed arm alone. The room exploded in applause. Mrs. Vance lowered her arm. She looked at Sarah with tears in her eyes. "You taught me to remember that I can still fly." Sarah walked toward her. She knelt in front of her wheelchair. "You could always fly, Mrs. Vance. You just needed someone to remind you that you had wings." And Emily, standing in the back, understood something that would change the rest of her life. True success isn't measured in hotels built. It's measured in lives changed. A year after the day Emily discovered Sarah doing yoga with her mother, things were very different. Mrs. Vance could move her right arm about a foot, not completely, but more than the doctors thought possible. Her right leg still didn't respond, but her mood was unrecognizable compared to 2 years ago. She danced with her mind every day, and sometimes when Sarah moved her limbs, Mrs. Vance closed her eyes and whispered the names of the ballet positions. Arabesque, tendu, relevé, grangette. As if she were on an invisible stage, Sarah was no longer a housekeeper. She was director of the Impossible Movement Program. She earned $80,000 a year. She supervised 20 therapists, and she still arrived at 6 in the morning to work personally with Mrs. Vance, because some connections can't be broken with promotions. And Emily had reduced her work hours. She was still CEO, but she no longer worked 14 hours a day. She worked 8. The rest of the time she spent with her mother, participating in the yoga sessions, learning, connecting, making up for lost time. The Impossible Movement Program became a national model. Other companies began to copy it. Other people began to create similar programs, and all because a housekeeper who lost her own mother refused to let another mother lose the will to live. 2 years later, Emily received a call from a journalist from a national newspaper. They wanted to write an article about the Impossible Movement Program. The journalist came. She interviewed Emily, Sarah, Mrs. Vance, dozens of patients. And when they published the article, the headline read, "Millionaire CEO learns from housekeeper that movement doesn't require legs. It requires hope." Emily framed that article. She hung it in her office, not because it talked about her program, but because it captured a truth that had taken her 45 years to learn. The wisest people don't always have college degrees. Sometimes they have hearts that see what degrees can't teach. This story doesn't have a fairy tale ending because real life doesn't work that way. Mrs. Vance never walked again. Her right arm improved but never fully healed. Her right leg remained paralyzed, but Mrs. Vance lived again, and that for her was enough. Sarah never got her mother back, but she saved dozens of other mothers, fathers, children, people in wheelchairs who thought their lives were over. And Emily learned that building an empire means nothing if you build that empire on absences, on people you love but never see. 3 years after that first day, Sarah came to work. Emily organized something special, a performance at the Kennedy Center, the same theater where Mrs. Vance had danced for 30 years. But it wasn't a traditional ballet performance. It was a show of adapted dance. Dancers in wheelchairs, dancers with paralysis, dancers with disabilities that the world says shouldn't be able to dance. And in the center of the stage was Mrs. Vance in her wheelchair, with Sarah standing behind her, moving her arms for her, guiding her through an adapted choreography of Swan Lake. Mrs. Vance couldn't move alone, but she moved anyway, through Sarah, through love, through pure willpower. And when the music ended, the theater erupted in applause. Mrs. Vance was crying. Sarah was crying. Emily, sitting in the front row, was crying because Mrs. Vance had danced again, not as she had danced before, but in a new way, a way the world had never seen, a way that proved that impossible is just a word we use for things we're afraid to try. After the show, a reporter asked Mrs. Vance how she felt. Mrs. Vance smiled, and with her voice still affected by the stroke, but clear in meaning, she said something that Emily would never forget. "For 2 years, I was in a wheelchair, but dead inside. Then someone came along who taught me that dancing doesn't require legs. It just requires a soul. And my soul never stopped dancing. It just needed someone to remind me of it." The reporter turned to Sarah. "And you? How has your life changed since you started this?" Sarah looked at Mrs. Vance, then at Emily, then at the dozens of patients in wheelchairs who had been in the show. "I lost my mother 6 years ago, and that loss haunted me every day until I met Mrs. Vance, and I realized that I can't bring my mother back, but I can honor her by saving other mothers, other fathers, other people that the world has decided no longer matter. And every time I see someone in a wheelchair smile again, I feel like my mother is smiling too, through me, across time." Today, if you visit any of Emily Estrada's 12 hotels, you'll see something unusual. In the main lobby, there's a large photo, not of a building, not of a corporate logo. It's a photo of Mrs. Eleanor Vance in her wheelchair, with her arms extended in a ballet pose, with Sarah Jenkins behind her, guiding her. And underneath, a plaque that reads, "Movement isn't just physical, it's emotional, it's spiritual. It's refusing to let the world decide when your life is over." If this story broke your heart, good. Because there are millions of people in wheelchairs right now who believe their lives are over. Millions of people who have lost hope. Millions of people waiting for someone to remind them that they still matter. And maybe, just maybe, you can be that someone. You don't need to be a therapist. You don't need to have money. You don't need anything except the willingness to see the person behind the wheelchair, to see the human being behind the disability, and to remind them that being alive doesn't require legs that work. It requires a heart that refuses to give up. Emily Estrada was a millionaire who had forgotten how to be present. Mrs. Eleanor Vance was a dancer who had forgotten how to fly. And Sarah Jenkins was a housekeeper who taught them both that impossible is just an invitation to try harder. This story began with a question. What did Emily see when she opened that door? And the answer is simple. She saw her mother feel alive again. She saw that movement doesn't require muscles, it requires will. She saw that sometimes the true miracles don't come in the form of cures. They come in the form of people who refuse to let hope die. And she saw that a housekeeper without a college degree has more wisdom than all the doctors in the world, because doctors can heal bodies, but only love can heal souls. And you? What are you going to do with this story? Are you going to forget it? Or are you going to remember that maybe there's someone in your life who needs you to remind them that they can still fly? Don't answer now. Just think about it. Because maybe, just maybe, you too can be the reason someone feels alive again. This story has ended, but yours continues. What are you going to do with it?